Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's. I'm Anne McElvoy here in Davos, and I'm with Sam Coates in London, and we're here as something important breaks.
This morning's recording was somewhat unusual. A massive curveball emerged halfway through the recording. Donald Trump denouncing Britain for handing away the Chagos Islands and calling Keir Starmer's plan great stupidity. Huge implications. We go through it all, but you can hear it breaking halfway through the recording and listen to our surprise as that happens. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Tuesday, January the 20th, and I'm in Davos, where we're all waiting for Donald T to descend on the Alps. Last night, it emerged President Trump had conceded in his Sunday call with Keir Starmer that he might have been given bad information on the announcement about troop deployments from European countries to Greenland. So, for all the public escalation, might this be the first sign of a possible thaw? My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Yes, details of that call were an important scoop by my colleague Mark Stone, revealing stuff that wasn't in the publicly available readout and suggesting that maybe Donald Trump is being nudged in the right direction. Yesterday, if you remember on the podcast, I told you that a big part of the British strategy was to try and change Trump's interpretation of the European deployments, including that single British military figure, to convince him that they weren't a hostile act, but to support effectively US goals. Well, that's exactly what the PM attempted to do on Sunday's call. And given our story and the CNN story, it does suggest that there is a chance this is paying off.
And that would explain why Keir Starmer backed away from trade war threats at yesterday's press conference, just as others in Europe were starting to respond more aggressively. Well, let's see how this all plays out. Here it's -7, diplomatic chill all round as we shuffle along our designated routes, being chivied by increasingly anxious ranks of trilingual security folk. Lots of world leaders, but no UK Prime Minister, at least not yet. It's Rachel Reeves who will arrive later today, followed by Peter Kyle and then Yvette Cooper tomorrow.
I see from Playbook that they still haven't completely closed it off. I think Downing Street were considering going yesterday, but sort of backed away for now. Anyway, maybe he's got tomorrow.
I think it just depends on whether they get FaceTime with Donald Trump. I was also intrigued by that Playbook line and just asking around, and I think it's still probably in the hands of Donald Trump's diary secretary, and who would like to be them?
Right, we're going to go back to events in Davos towards the end of this podcast, Anne. But we have one focus, we have one audience, and that's back home. So it's a sharp return to core territory. Loads going on, busy day. There's going to be an announcement mid-morning on the Chinese embassy. Personally, I think we know the direction of travel on that. So I don't think it's going to be much more than a performative moment rather than something where we might be surprised by the decision. I feel like there's bigger fish to fry today.
Well, indeed. Overnight, another U-turn from the Prime Minister, not another one, as Brenda from Bristol so rightly said. There is too much politics going on. But go on we must. And Labour has announced it will consult on a social media ban for the under-16s after Downing Street signalled it was dropping objections to imposing restrictions on social media on the Australia model. 6 months of cabinet ministers arguing this wasn't the right course. Lisa Nandy saying she didn't want to be prosecuting young people just last month, especially now that they're about to start to vote. She didn't say that, I did. Peter Kyle saying a ban wasn't on the cards. Keir Starmer arguing it was more about how you control the content. All that gone after more than 60 Labour MPs indicated they would defy the whip on this. So it does raise the question, who is really in charge, government or Labour MPs?
Yeah, I think it's really getting quite critical. And I want to add to this, and I want to reveal something new. Last week, you remember we did a deep dive into the government's plans to scale back jury trials and asked whether that would fix the problem, the backlog in the face of another Labour revolt. Well, today I can reveal that there are now discussions in government about whether or not there should be a climb down on this as well. They haven't decided that they will U-turn, But I can tell listeners this morning, those discussions have begun.
And after the Hillsborough delay yesterday and dozens more U-turns that we've covered it in the last weeks and months, but just to put you on your mettle a bit, Sam, are you saying on jury trials, this is a whole you or half a you? And where would that leave that punchy defence of the changes that we heard from David Lammy? He's been saying and persisting and saying it's necessary to take pressure off the overburdened courts.
I'm not saying there's a U-turn yet, but it is under discussion. Let me spell out exactly what's going on. So David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister, came up with these plans, but wasn't able to get a standalone piece of legislation to do this in the King's speech. It was rejected because this jury trial plan to scale back jury trials wasn't in the manifesto. So it isn't legislatively being judged a priority by this government in that sense, even though they would argue it's very important. So the jury plans are being shoehorned into an existing bill, the Courts Bill, which is before Parliament. But that legislation does a host of other things. It was intended for a different purpose, compelling offenders to attend sentencing, restricting parental responsibility for sex offenders, expanding victim support, strengthening the Victims Commissioner powers, that kind of stuff. But now it's the vehicle for rolling back some jury trials as well. But there's a worry that adding on this jumbo policy into the existing legislation will jeopardise the whole lot of it. And while it could get through second reading, by the time you get to report stage, Labour MPs will just be able to revolt and pick off the jury bit and throw the whole thing into chaos. So I am told that the conversation has started about whether to accept or just accept the inevitable and take out the jury trials section. Two caveats. Now, first of all, I think if you just WhatsApp people in the Justice Department, they would deny it. They were denying this yesterday. I am only telling you, Anne, because I am confident that this conversation is happening and it doesn't necessarily involve justice ministers, but it is going on, I believe. And secondly, absolutely, a final decision hasn't been made. Funnily enough, my own assessment is that the rebellion, there were 39 names in the letter before Christmas, isn't actually growing in size at the moment. And some groups of usual suspects actually aren't joining in. So it might be the determination that they can weather this rebellion and don't have to take it out. But the fact is, as I say, the discussion is taking place.
Fascinating. And that last point might even save some of the plans, because my impression, just talking to MPs as I go around, it's either a subject they care very passionately about or they really don't. But what they are all noticing is this worry among voters that Labour's commitment is not really its bond, because the glue so easily comes unstuck when there is pressure and there's not the backing of that confidence at the top to say this move, this change really matters to us. And it seems to me that that is where the heebie-jeebies are coming from as much as any particular policy area.
God, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more strongly. There comes a point with all of these U-turns where you actually just have to ask whether the emperor has any clothes. You know, I'm not saying we're quite there yet, but it's been clear for some time that if there is a difficult issue potentially in the Commons, then Keir Starmer backs away, right? That's the pattern. But, and I'm going to choose my words deliberately and carefully right now, that raises an important question. Is there a point at which people start saying, does Keir Starmer command a majority in the House of Commons? As incredible as it is to say with somebody with a landslide majority, unless he can show he can do things, do difficult things at some point, and he keeps backing down in the face of them, unless he can prove that at some point, that question, does Keir Starmer command a majority in the House of Commons, will be asked. And of course, that is the test about whether a government stays or falls, right? A government who doesn't, and a Prime Minister who doesn't command a majority in the House of Commons is in real trouble. It is part of the overall picture of a government system that just doesn't have enough of a grip to withstand big problems that it's facing. And given everything else, I think it's a key component of what's potentially going wrong for Keir Starmer.
100%, though, if the Prime Minister does in fact show up in Davos, I do hope that the Emperor brings clothes, because you certainly need a good thermal layer. I think we generally hope the PM turns up with some clothes on, but yeah, you do need your thermals here, especially in the morning when we leave this cozy chalet. One of the things, to your point there, Sam, one of the things that I have heard that Starmer and Rachel Reeves have been telling business folk in the run up to Davos, they've been hosting a lot of drinks and having people in for tea to warm up senior entrepreneurs to their big push on growth and cost of living, is, look, we got this last budget through without problems, without adverse market reaction. You see, we are a safe pair of hands. The only thing you would say, and this was put to me by a rather skeptical northern entrepreneur, it's a very low bar when you have to have pointed out to you by the Chancellor and by the Prime Minister, or those close to the Prime Minister who are in the conversation. It's a major achievement. We got the budget through, but it does show how nervy they've been.
Well, if you're looking at Britain's reputation in Davos and around the world, I think here's something, a curveball that's just happened as we're recording this podcast, which is Donald Trump taking to Truth Social about Britain and the Chagos Islands. And I think this is going to arrive like the kind of rock meteor out of the sky today, saying, shockingly, our brilliant NATO ally, the United Kingdom, is currently planning to give away the island of Diego Garcia, the site of a vital US military base, to Mauritius, and to do so for no reason whatsoever. And he goes on to say that will help China and Russia. For every step forward that this government makes, maybe helping slightly reduce tensions over Greenland, it's just one massive giant leap backwards. And I think that's what we're dealing with. That, I think, is what is going to have to be on the agenda at this morning's cabinet.
Wow. It's not just a curveball, that's going to land here like a rocket for any number of reasons. One, it seemed that Keir Starmer was at least keeping that solid relationship going. You got the word brilliant ally in there, but it doesn't really help if then the other end of the brilliant ally then says you've got a major something wrong. And also because I was briefed very strongly, as it happened just coincidentally, Sam, a few days ago, by a leading ambassador, one of the top ambassadors that we have, that there'd be no problem with the Americans about the deal on the Chagos Islands that was pushed through very much at the behest of Jonathan Powell there in Downing Street for and with Keir Starmer, and that, in fact, it was what the Americans wanted. In fact, I was having a bit of an argument about whether it was a good idea or not. They were absolutely convinced that America was on side. Either that has changed or it was not quite the case. Either way, that is a really big row that is going to land here.
Well, Donald Trump has just called it an act of great stupidity to give away the Chagos Islands. So this is a massive headache for Keir Starmer and his government. I'm sure it'll come up at Cabinet this morning.
We read some extraordinary accounts of the meeting. Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, urging colleagues to form a Praetorian Guard around Keir Starmer, denouncing those who put personal ambition before party unity, paging Wes Streeting, I think, there in her view. Emma Reynolds, the Environment Secretary, she was similarly critical of the dangers of infighting and briefing against colleagues. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, saying they should focus on the prospect of what she allegedly called a fascist government led by Nigel Farage, the Reform leader. Well, the target of a lot of these comments clearly was Streeting. And then anonymous cabinet ministers urging Keir to sack him also became a theme of the Sunday Times, blaming Darren Jones, who also has a big speech this morning. Wow. Happy days in cabinet. Sam, what's your take?
Look, it's incredibly febrile at the moment for all the reasons that we were saying, but we've suddenly entered a new era where we seem to be back to May-style live blogging of cabinet, because we heard one version, brilliant reporting from the Times, Patrick Maguire and Steve Swinford and Alva Ray of the New Statesman. I'm told that there was more to that cabinet meeting than has yet reached the public domain, that the story that was used with the comments that reported was one of supportive cabinet ministers sticking up for the Prime Minister, right? That's what you essentially just outlined. But I'm told there's more. Alongside Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, Jenny Chapman, and the others that you mentioned, there were actually a number of more pointed interventions. Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary, was amongst them. I'm told she was critical of the government. Then, and this is in last week's cabinet meeting, then there's Ed Miliband, a pretty important and popular figure in the Labour circles at the moment. I'm told the Energy Secretary told the Prime Minister that he needed to get the diagnosis of what was wrong with the country right and explain to voters the mess that it's all in. Ed Miliband thinks that the reason is austerity and trickle-down economics, but whether or not that's the diagnosis shared by Starmer, I think Miliband just thinks Starmer needs to find a diagnosis and made that clear at the cabinet meeting. So absolutely critical voices. Then there's Alan Campbell, leader of the Commons. He doesn't talk in cabinet that much. A bit of this was in the Times, but I'm told he was all but challenging the cabinet members calling for unity, saying, look, the government needs to know its direction before blaming Labour MPs for rebellions. It basically pointed remark to Keir Starmer, you've got to set direction. And then there was Yvette Cooper. Now, this didn't happen last week, but the week before. In the face of the presentation about the importance of the cost of living, she spoke up and said, look, at the risk of being unpopular, cost of living isn't an answer, isn't a sufficient answer to everybody's concerns. And government's got to tell a bigger story on things like migration and other things. And that's still being repeated around by people. You know, Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary's intervention, really making people sit up. So it was all a lot more spiky, I think, than maybe the impression that we got, and all not necessarily simply as a rallying around Keir Starmer.
It sounds a bit like it was, certainly that's really intriguing, deep stuff that you've got there, Sam, in your accounts. It's a bit like the Wizard of Oz. You know, they're all looking for the wizard, but when they get there, he's just not there. And I think that's right, that probably that first story was really a reaction to that feeling, and that Wes Streeting was carrying a lot of the blame. My sense, too, is that this is turning now much more, well, you know, if you're in this mess, is it just that you've got hyper ambitious people who want to take your job? And also, like, shouldn't parties have people who want to be leader as well? You know, I do think that is another aspect of that. But also, it does come down to the fact if they're not convinced that Keir Starmer has a big story to tell. I thought that Ed Miliband point really quite dangerous, actually, to Keir Starmer. Well, later today, we also get the supposed defection from Labour to Reform. Let's finally see who it is and whether the bets have been correct on that. But have all of these events in the last week too much politics, as Brenda would put it? Has that made any dent in the weekly YouGov Sky Times voting intention poll?
I mean, in essence, no. Reform UK are in the same figure as last week on 24. That suggests that there hasn't been any movement at all from Nadine Zahawi and Robert Jenrick's defections, which is interesting. We'll see whether that changes over time. Labour on 19, Tories on 18, Greens on 17, Lib Dems on 14. So that's interesting. Is Robert Jenrick the household name that Reform might hope it is? That is yet to be proved. Right, Anne, we've had enormous curveballs and live news during this podcast recording. How is it all going to land in Davos? And what was on the agenda already for today? How does the plan and the breaking developments all mesh together?
Oh, great. Thanks for that, Sam. It's like a sort of finals question. Yes, this Davos will probably end up on a lot of politics finals papers. So I think that it's all about Trump. Mood-wide, Sam, that is what matters here. Yes, we're going to hear today from a number of leaders, obviously talking up their own countries. The ones I think that really matter, however, given the standoff over Greenland, Macron is here. Emmanuel Macron, fire and fury, doubtless, from France's leader. He's been going pretty far. Is he going to keep going in that direction? Or, as we pointed out, if there is perhaps the sign that Donald Trump is now blaming wrong information, blaming somebody else for escalating so hard. Might there be a climb down? Mark Carney from Canada, he could also play a role in that. He's very silky, he knows how to, and he also knows how to handle Davos. He's the ultimate Davos man. I once had to do my I won't go into it, but a swab during the COVID era alongside Mark Carney. So I've always felt I had a Davos affinity with him. Von der Leyen, she's turning up for the European Commission. You know, what tone will she strike? But it really comes down, I think, to what mood Donald Trump arrives in. I think there is some sympathy here for the Ukrainians. Ukrainian Davos was always a big theme since the start of even from 2014 and since the start of the war in earnest. And I think they feel, this hope of trying to get a deal with the Americans across the line is just being benched because they're not getting the attention from Donald Trump. So a lot of people turning up to drink there. Excellent Sweet Cafe. They have one of the best coffees in Davos. People go to the Ukrainian house for that and a bit more. Behind the scenes, I think there is talk among the Europeans, a lot of avoiding confrontation. That would play into our earlier theme. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani, and some others saying, let's not issue grand threats from Europe against the US and do it privately. It's a bit of a dividing line, and I think we'll see whether that plays out as we get through the next day on all of fueled by all that good Ukrainian coffee.
Hanging out with the elites. I'd think of nothing less from you. Of course, that's what's happening. That's a brilliant summary. That sets us up for the day ahead. My goodness, I've no idea how it's all now going to play out. Keir Starmer has a lot on his plate. I wonder whether he does revisit that decision not to go to Davos because he needs to work out whether or not the King's visit goes ahead and all sorts of stuff like that. Let's reconvene tomorrow morning and just see where that's left us all. Good luck today.
Thank you, Sam. I knew I would get your love and sympathy for having to hang out with the elites in a highly expensive ski resort.